Black Cave Tragedy. April 1995, Thomas Edward Benning decided to explore Black Cave in Arizona once again. Having been there before, he felt assured that this would be a safe and manageable trip. Equipped only with an electric miner's lamp and without a helmet, he entered the cave alone. The initial section was familiar, and he navigated it without difficulty. However, a hidden side passage soon caught his eye. Overcome with curiosity, Thomas deviated from his usual route and ventured into the darker, narrower passage. As he moved deeper into the unfamiliar path, he eventually decided to turn back. But to his dismay, an hour had passed, and he was utterly lost. Despite his efforts, he was unable to retrace his steps. Panic set in as his lamp began flickering before ultimately going out, plunging him into complete darkness far beneath the surface. Desperate, Thomas resorted to using a box of matches. The faint glow barely illuminated the jagged rocks around him, but it was his only source of light. One by one, he struck the matches, but they burned out quickly, and soon he was left with nothing. Determined to find a way out, he began leaving small, insignificant items as markers to avoid circling the same area. Starving, dehydrated, and exhausted, he pressed on until he encountered a narrow crevice in the rock, just a few feet deep. Believing it might lead him back to a familiar passage, he carefully lowered himself into the gap. However, once his hips passed through the tightest section, he realized his critical mistake was now wedged in place, completely immobilized. Summoning every last ounce of strength, Thomas attempted to lift himself back up, but it was futile. Trapped alone in the pitch-black cave, he called out, but there was no one to hear him. Days passed as he remained stuck, growing weaker with each moment. Back home, his wife grew increasingly concerned when he didn't return. She contacted the police, prompting an extensive search of the nearby caves. Unfortunately, Thomas had not informed anyone exactly where he was going, leaving rescuers with little to work from. Eventually, his car was discovered parked near Black Cave, and a search team was deployed. They carefully explored the mapped sections of the cave, discovering some of Thomas's belongings, including his glasses and shirt. However, they overlooked the secret passage he had entered. Amazingly, Thomas was still alive at this point, though his condition had deteriorated significantly. Days passed with no breakthroughs, and the search was eventually called off. Authorities declared him officially missing. Refusing to give up, his wife continued pleading for further efforts. She distributed flyers and sought help from anyone who might have information, but time passed with no answers. It wasn't until December 1996, more than a year and a half later, that 3 other cavers stumbled upon Thomas's remains in the dark, narrow passage where he had become trapped. Zacaton's Sinkhole Incident. On the 6th of April, 1994, renowned cave diver Sheikh Exlion, of the first people in history to log over 100 deep cave dives, set out to break a new record. His goal was to dive into Mexico's Zacaton Sinkhole, one of the deepest known water-filled sinkholes, reaching depths of over 1,000 feet. Exley had been passionate about deep diving from a young age, often competing with his brother to see who could dive the deepest. Tragically, during one of these competitions, his brother lost consciousness at around 50 feet and drowned. Despite this devastating loss, Exley pursued his passion, becoming a leading expert in deep cave diving. For reference, most divers are advised not to go beyond 150 feet, while even the most experienced rarely exceed 300 feet. Accompanied by fellow diver Jim Bowden, Exley meticulously prepared for the record-breaking dive. The event attracted television crews eager to document the historic attempt. Though they descended together, their dives were independent. During a previous training dive in South Africa's Bushman's Hole, Exley had reached an astonishing 863 feet, but experienced troubling symptoms, hallucinations, and uncontrolled trembling signs of high-pressure nervous syndrome, HPNS. This condition, which typically manifests beyond 500 feet, is believed to result from compression affecting the central nervous system. It can cause confusion, tremors, and hallucinations, making deep diving exceptionally dangerous. To minimize risks, Exley and Bowden planned to descend slowly, carefully switching tanks as they went deeper. The first part of the dive proceeded smoothly, but around 800 feet, Bowden noticed his hands trembling, an early sign of HPNS. At 900 feet, he faced another problem. His air supply was running critically low. His tank pressure had dropped to a dangerous level, far below the safe threshold. Knowing decompression could take hours, Bowden realized he had to ascend immediately to survive. Meanwhile, Exley was facing even graver issues. At 880 feet, his vision blurred, his body trembled uncontrollably, and the combined effects of HPNS and nitrogen narcosis severely impaired his judgment. Struggling to stay oriented, he wrapped his descent line around his arm, but his rapid breathing further depleted his air supply. Attempting to switch tanks at such an extreme depth only worsened his situation. As Bowden cautiously ascended, he noticed Exley's descent line, still carrying unused tanks. He assumed Exley had reached the bottom and was beginning his return. However, the surface support team noticed something concerning bubbles were rising from only one diver. A support diver quickly wrote a note on an underwater slate. "Where's Shek?" Concerned, she descended to 280 feet and discovered a chilling sight: two small white pages floating on Exley's descent line. Upon closer inspection, they were his dive planning sheets. The realization was devastating. Exley was lost deep below. Nearly 10 hours after the dive began, Bowden surfaced, miraculously surviving his own life-threatening ordeal. But Exley, a legend who had rescued many divers in the past, remained lost in the depths. 3 days later, a recovery team pulled his descent line to the surface, bringing up his lifeless body. Despite the tragedy, Bowden had set a new world record for open-circuit scuba diving, reaching an extraordinary depth of 915 feet.
Want to know if they survived? Like and subscribe to unlock the answer. 3, 2, 1...